there what the Sure Gel package says that you need. And, but there's always a few other things that they don't mention. So in the email, we had mentioned things like a scraper. I use a potato masher to mush my fruit. Some people might use a blender instead. So whatever you would like to do to prepare your fruit, feel free. I'm just used to doing it with my potato masher, so that's the way that I feel comfortable doing it. The very first thing I'm going to do is I am going to put my clean jars into some water and put them on the heat so that they will be sterilized as well as hot, because we always need to put, if we're doing something hot, like a jam or a jelly, it needs to go into a hot jar as it goes into the hot water. Otherwise, your jar is going to break. So we need hot all the way around. So with everything else at home, my stove is big enough. I have all my pots going at the same time. This one, I'm going to put it on the stove behind me. So however you can do it at home so that it fits. So we'll have those heating up as we go. I have my water bath canner here, and it is warming up. Make sure that when you put the water in your water bath canner, if you don't do it often enough to be able to judge it, just to eyeball it, make sure you have your rack. Put your rack down in there. Put an empty jar down in there, and make sure you have at least an inch of water over your jar. That needs for the water flow, the heat to process it right. You need water up and over it, not like when you're pressure canning where you only need a little bit of water in the pot. This one needs to be totally immersed with an inch of water above it. So I find that it heats up better if I don't leave my rack in there. So I take it out and cover it and set my rack aside until I'm ready to put stuff in it. Then I will put the rack there again. So then I need my pot to put my peaches in. I had specified about a 7 quart. That's just because that's what I use. I have noticed when I first started making jam, I had a smaller pot, and smaller is not good because it bubbles more and tends to burn you because it bubbles on you and makes a mess of your stove. So a little bit bigger of a pot, but nothing humongous. And also a nice heavy pot. Seems to work better for jams and jellies. It has a more even temperature. So that works much better. Again, the pot I started with when I started making jam 30 odd years ago was too thin. So made messes everywhere. You learn from your mistakes, right? So I need a pot for my peaches, and we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna start with our peaches. This one I have peeled, I haven't peeled the rest. So we will go ahead and start peeling peaches. You want nice ripe peaches. We specified that in the email as well. So this one, if you can see, it's kind of making juice as I push it. It's nice and soft, and that's what you need for jam. If it's a harder peach, you won't have enough juice and you'll have to add water. And it just kind of waters down the taste of your jam. You can still do it. So if that's what you have tonight, it will work. But the riper, the juicier the peach, the better the jam will taste, and the less peaches that you have to cut up in order to use. So as I do this, so I've peeled this one, I'm going to cut it in half, and it should come right off so that I can get the pit out. And little pieces are fine. You'll see some brown spots on here. That's just riper spots. That's fine. Nothing wrong with that. I'm going to cut it into kind of smallish pieces so that it's easier to mash. If you're putting it in the food processor, just cut it into a few big chunks to put in your food processor, because that will do all the work for you. So as I do this, I'm going to grab this one out of here. And a little bit of outside of the pit, I don't know what that is exactly called. I don't bother taking that out. It adds a little bit more fiber to my jam. I kind of like somewhat chunky jam anyway. So kind of depends on you if you want to take the time and cut all that out. If you want it more of a smooth jam, that's totally up to you. So I like the type of potato masher that has the little holes, not the one that's just the little wiggly line, because this will actually mash it very well. So I also have a bowl with a flat bottom. At home, I use what I call a plate bowl. It's part of my Corral set. So it's like a stew bowl type of thing. So it's kind of like a bowl, but it's a flat bottom. So that's what I use at home, because you need something nice to be able to push it against, and a rounded bowl will not let you do that. So I'm just mashing this up. You can see how that has kind of small pieces in there.
Jennifer, while you're mashing,
along here.
Jennifer, while you're mashing, some people say they only see you small. Is that the case still?
I can't hear you.
Some people say they only see you small. Can everybody see her large? I'm gonna let me try something again and see if I can spotlight her bigger for everyone.
Okay.
Spotlight for everyone. Now, can everybody see her large?
No.
Is that better? All right. So I'm going to start putting my peaches into a liquid cup so that you can measure better eyeball wise. So that was one nice large peach, and it gave me almost a cup. So this recipe that came in the Sure Gel packet is what I'm using. And it calls, I gotta get my glasses so I can see. It calls for 4 cups of finely chopped peaches. So that's what we need to get to. So let's go on to the next peach. And while we do that, I will talk about this peach quick. So as I said, you want it nice and soft. Brown spots are okay. However, moldy spots are not. So this peach with one moldy spot on it, I'm not gonna use this peach in my jam because I don't want any possibility of there being any of that in here. So this one I would make cobbler with, or something that I'm cooking and eating right away. So nice soft peaches, but not moldy peaches. I don't know if any of you have ever seen the movie Sweet Home Alabama, but they make peach preserves in that movie, and they talk about the nastier they look, the better they taste, which is kind of true. So you don't want it way overripe, but the riper the better. And so we're just gonna keep peeling peaches here as we go. And if I'm getting ahead of anybody, let me know. We can always find something to talk about in the meantime. So considering that gave me almost a cup, if I have other peaches about the same size, I'll only need 4 or 5 peaches. When I make my peach jam to sell at the farmer's market, when I was doing that, my peaches at home don't look this perfect. So it was always cutting out large portions of them, and therefore I might use 2 dozen peaches to make a batch of jam. Just depends on your peach crop, because you don't want any of those bad spots in there if it's something that might cause problems down the road. But just being a little bit brown because it's nice and ripe, that's perfect. All right. So while we're peeling our peaches, I'll talk about the pectin just a little bit. So pectin is a natural product. A lot of it is made actually from apples. It's again, as I said, it's a natural product. That's what makes it gel together. Now, most fruit has pectin in it, but the more pectin, it has more pectin, the less ripe it is. And since we're not using less ripe peaches, we want them nice and juicy, then the peach itself doesn't have as much natural pectin in it. So we're going to use pectin, but if you wanted to make pectin-less jam, you certainly can. It just takes longer to cook because the pectin is going to make that process go a whole lot faster. And then there's different types of pectin. So I've got Sure Gel. That's just what I got used to using. So I know that it works well. So that's why I keep using it. Sometimes I use the Sure Gel that comes in a jar. And that way I can make the batch however big I want, depending on just, if it says use this much pectin to this much fruit, I can double it, I can triple it, I can whatever. When you use one that's in a box, you do it exactly as the recipe says. Otherwise, it will not set. So you need the amount of sugar that it says, You need the whole thing of pectin, you need that amount of fruit. If you don't have that amount of fruit, you can use some water or a little bit of fruit juice that has no flavor, such as like white grape juice is a good one because it will add a little bit more fruitiness and the sugar content of your peach, but doesn't add the flavor of, say, regular grape juice or apple juice or something like that. So always follow the recipe exactly. If you wanted to make low sugar jam or jelly, then you would buy the low sugar pectin, which they have. It usually costs a little more, but it is readily available as well. And then you can use a lesser amount of sugar and still have your product set because that pectin is formulated a little bit different. So as we do this,
As we talk about the short gel just a little bit,
jar down just a little bit.
I will show you that. Make sure you look for the expiration date on your shore gel, because there is an expiration date on your shore gel. So just saying, make sure you check, look, there is an expiration date. So if you have shore gel you've had for a while, just check your boxes.
I mean, you're not really on my screen with me, are you? All right. So there is also liquid pectin, and that is used for lots of different recipes. So it kind of depends on what you're doing as to which pectin you want to use. For my jalapeno jelly, I use a liquid pectin. And for strawberry jam, you can use a liquid pectin. You just kind of do it backwards. So with dry pectin, this powdered pectin, we put that in when we put our peaches in the pot. And that's how it is going to set correctly. With liquid pectin, you do it the opposite way, and you put the sugar in the pot first, and then you add the liquid pectin at the end. So just depends on the pectin. Make sure you read the recipe. And you might be using a recipe from the book that Kenna showed earlier. And so just do as it says. One book that I like is the Bob Blue book, because that's all tried and true recipes that they have done the science. They know it works. They know the pH is correct. And that's the biggest thing when you're making things like this that you're canning. You want the pH balance to be right. That's what makes it safe to eat when you open it up again. So that's one reason why we need to follow the directions exactly. It might taste okay, but it might not be safe. And the safe is the biggest thing. We don't want to be getting sick. All right. Nice juicy peaches make for dirty hands. So keep washing as you go. I find it's easier to do one peach at a time. Okay. All right. So remember, with a liquid measuring cup, you always have it flat. You look at it at eye level to read it correctly. So I have 2 cups here, which is half of what I need. That's where my little rubber scraper comes in handy. It says it wants 2 cups. It wants all of those 2 cups and not just part of those 2 cups. Nice and noisy. All right, next peach, here we go. And I was planning on doing this peach jam. Part of my reasoning was that peaches are ripe in July. It's National Peach Month for one thing. And some of our local farmers have peaches that they sell at the farmer's market. Unfortunately, none of them had them yet this year. I know our peach trees did nothing this year. So I had to go and purchase these, unfortunately, at Walmart. I know a couple of Reed Valley has some peaches, and I'm sure some other places around do as well. I know someone had told me they got a bunch of peaches from the peach truck when it came through. So wherever you get your peaches, just make sure they're nice and ripe when you do this. Some folks will actually peel and freeze their peaches and put them in the freezer till a different time of year when they have time to make jams or jellies with it. I like to do it when it's nice and fresh because I think it tastes best that myself. I don't like the flavor that freezing fruit gives to fruit, but some people don't notice the difference. So whatever works for you, that is fine. All right. So, and that's one way to know that your peach is nice and ripe is if it comes off the pit well, when you do that, when you cut it. If it is not ripe enough yet, it will stay there on the pit.
There was a comment in the comments that said Evan Orchard was a good place to get your peaches as well, because I think a few have got them there. And when Jennifer was talking about reliable resources, just make sure that anything that you're looking for when you're doing that search is from an extension service or mall. Those are about the only one. But even if you go out of state to a different extension service, they'll have to tweak their recipes to adjust a little bit based on their altitude and a lot of different things. So your best bet is to get the university publications and/or let us direct you in the best way to find your recipes. Especially if you're pressure canning, and we're not really talking about pressure canning. In the groups that signed up for both the salsa and the peach jam, I will send some video links that the university has put together for pressure canning, just in case you want to watch them, refresh your brain a little bit on that if you have not pressure canned yet. While Jennifer is still working on her peaches, I can let you know if you're not aware that there's some services for your food preservation that the extension office offers. If you are pressure canning, we can check your pressure canner. If it is a dial gauge, if you bring your dial gauge canner lid in, we can check and make sure your dial gauge pressure is where it should be and accurate. And they do sometimes not lose their accuracy. So if you have an older canner, want that tested, bring that into the office because we can test that. We also have for your availability, for you to be able to borrow pressure canners and water baths. You have to kind of leave a deposit for them, but you're allowed to take them. You sign them out. We have 1 pressure canner, 2 water baths. So you might not know that, just letting you know. So if you're very new at food preservation and you just want to get your hands wet trying before you make any big purchases, those are options that you have available through our extension office.
And I will pipe in there and say that I know the library also has pressure canners and I think water bath canners that you can check out. So that's another option if you don't want to go out and buy one yet to see if it's something that you want to do. All right, now my jars were bubbling. I could hear them jiggling back there. So I went ahead and turned the water down to a very low, and that way it will stay hot, but won't be boiling that water away. It's nice to have that water because if my water bath canner, say I was doing 2 batches and was going to use that again for my second batch, I might not have quite enough water in it, and you want to add boiling water to boiling water. So if that is still nice and hot and boiling, then that's something that you can add to that and then not have to wait for it to come back to a boil. All right, we'll see if this peach gives me enough or if I need another one. How is everyone there doing with their amount of peaches? I don't want to move on to the next step if we're not there yet.
If you're not ready to move on, you have to unmute yourself up. Jen needs a few more minutes. Her peaches were small. It took her a little longer to peel. Some of them are watching, so I know some of you aren't participating, you're just watching, which is
I
fine.
have 4 cups.
Yeah, 4 cups. Good. So we're almost all there, Jen. Just a few more minutes. And if you're peeling another peach, everybody might be caught up by the time you're done. And I might say, peel an extra one. I might come eat it. I can eat it. Jen can't because she's making it. You could too at home if you washed your hands after you ate it before you move on. Just saying.
And I can't hear anybody's response. Howard, what did I say? Okay. Okay. All right, and when we looked at this recipe for the cook jam directions, when we sent out the email, it says that you will start with 3 pounds of peaches. And if you have peach trees, you start with whatever you have, right? You go from there. I always, if I were to buy peaches like I did this time, I bought extra. Because the smaller the peach is, the less you will get from the peach, because every peach has a pit, and therefore there will be more pit and less fruit. So I think I got 6 pounds just to be on, make sure I was safe, because I didn't want to not have enough while I was teaching this class. But I probably used about 3.5 to 4 pounds. But again, it just depends on the peaches you have. All right, I need just a little bit more. All right, and if anybody's water bath canner, if it's starting to boil, go ahead and turn it down just a little bit. We can bring it back up to a boil as we get closer, but we don't want your water boiling away. Even with the top on, you're still gonna lose some of that water volume. So don't turn it down to low, just turn it down a tad so that it's still nice and hot, but not boiling quite as hard. All depends on what type of stove you have and all that and stuff, how long it takes that to boil. So I have enough peaches for my 4 cups. And I want all this good juice that's in the bottom of my bowl. And everything that's in my cup. Now, I've made jam enough times over the last few years that I know what I'm doing off the top of my head. But until about 2 years ago, even though I made numerous batches of jam every year, I would still look at the recipe every single time to make sure I was doing it right. So if you need to keep looking at the recipe, that is totally understandable. All right, so I've got all my peaches in there. This recipe calls for lemon juice. Part of that is to keep a nice peach color, because peaches, kind of like apples, will brown, and the lemon juice will help it to not brown as it is getting prepared, so that it will be a nice peachy color when you're done and not a brown color. So it says 1 lemon, so it says 2 tablespoons fresh lemon juice. So I'm going to go ahead and squeeze a lemon to get some lemon juice. However, if you would rather use lemon juice, feel free, they both work. I guess that's the one thing I forgot, was a little bowl to put my lemon juice in. So let me grab one quick. And I have not turned my peaches on yet. I don't want that to be warming up until my pectin is in there. Otherwise, it does not work quite right. All right, Ken, we'll see if I can figure out this lemon juicer. It's actually pretty handy. I like it.
So are the hands that I'm seeing squeezing lemons too, so.
All right, a half gave me 1 tablespoon. And it says I need 2 tablespoons, so I'll need the rest of that 1 lemon. I'm gonna turn my water down just a tad there. There's my 2 tablespoons of lemon juice. All right. I'll wash that for afterwards. All right, and then my pectin. I'm gonna put that in there. Try to spread it around as you go, so it's not all clumped in one spot, and you're gonna stir it here in just a moment. All right, and then we'll talk about the spoon. I think we had put on the email, make sure you have a plastic spoon. Metal is going to hold the heat and take the heat away from the jam that you're making. So you need a nice plastic spoon, a nice heavy duty one if possible. A wooden spoon would work. They're just not always the cleanest things in the kitchen. So plastic's usually better in that sense, but you do not want metal. So that's stirred together nicely. I'm going to turn it on. And you want it at a high heat. And you're gonna keep stirring as you go. However, I like to save time. So I'm gonna give it a few stirs and I'm gonna measure my sugar. But as I'm measuring my sugar, I will keep stirring in between. Get the other stuff out of my way. So again, we need exact amounts. So it tells us that we need 5 cups of sugar. So for this, we're gonna have a dry measuring cup. I'm gonna go ahead and give this another stir. All right, thinking it was actually 5.5. Yes, okay, so we need 5.5 cups of sugar. So I have 1 cup and I have a 1/2 cup. Because as I said, we want exact amounts. If this was flour, I would be scooping it in with sugar. I don't do that, I just put it in there. But then flatten it off. So there's 1. I won't count out loud because you're probably trying to count yourself. And a half. If you're using a low sugar recipe instead of this regular one, then whatever you're using for sugar is fine. Sometimes with a low sugar recipe, you could use Splenda instead of sugar, but you cannot do that with the normal pectin. It needs to be real sugar. And any of you guys out there that plan on selling jam at the farmer's market down the road, unless you use the full sugar recipe, then it has to be approved by UK. So if you're making it Full sugar wise, again, from a trusted source, not just something on YouTube or Pinterest or whatever, then that is fine. But as soon as you reduce sugar at all, then that recipe, that's under the microprocessing permit and license. And those recipes have to be approved by UK because they test it to make sure the pH is adequate so that you're not causing illness down the road. All right, so that's warming up. I will get my stuff out of the way so that then I have this workspace for that when it's ready. I was telling Kenna at home, I do it on my table, which is behind. I turn around, so I've got my stuff on the stove, everything else is on my table. Here that doesn't happen, so however it needs to work in your kitchen. And as you probably just heard on this, since I was not stirring, it was starting to bubble. That does not mean it's boiling yet. It is not ready yet to put the sugar in. So that's why we need to keep stirring. And if there's anyone out there that doesn't know what a full rolling boil is, if you're reading the directions, that is what it says it needs to get to, a full rolling boil. That means that while you're stirring, it is still boiling everywhere in the pot. Not just a little bit here and there. Now, some people add a little bit of butter so that it does not foam as much. I personally don't like to add cholesterol to my jam, so I do not. It does foam on me some. I will skim the foam off when I'm getting ready to put it in the jars. And I keep that in the fridge, and that's what we eat off of most of the year. Since I would typically sell most of my jam, we would eat like the scum. So it still tastes good. It just has more air in it, so it's more likely to go bad faster, but in the refrigerator, it will be fine. All right, it's getting close. So as you can see, I still have a few kind of chunks in here. As I said, I like my jam kind of chunky. So if you were doing it for yourself and you like it a lot smoother, make sure you do it in something like a blender so that you're making much smaller pieces to cook down. All right, so this is starting to bubble on me all around, even though I am stirring. So that is a full rolling boil. So I'm going to add my sugar, and you add it all at once and stir as you go. As you can see, my pot's going round and round on this stove. Keep stirring as you go there as well. Get all that sugar mixed in. And as you can see that it kind of clarifies some as that sugar heats up, whereas before it was kind of a milky color. That sugar makes it clarify. That means that it's going in the right direction. That's how it should be. So again, we're going to come to a full rolling boil. This will take 5 to 10 minutes depending on the stove. And you got to keep stirring as you go. Till 2 years ago, we didn't have air conditioning in our house, so much nicer making jam on these hot days with air conditioning in the kitchen. I think a few days it was 110 in my house, in my kitchen.
I have a question while we're stirring. I've done peach jam before, and the recipes recommended blanching to make the peeling easier. Do you feel like that makes any difference in the jam?
Jennifer, did you hear the question?
I did not hear the question. Can you repeat it?
She wants to know if you've in the past she had read that in a recipe that you should blanch the peaches or
I didn't hear you still.
could blanch the peaches. Does that make it any quicker, easier to peel them?
No. Typically, if they are ripe, they will peel quite easily because the peel will just come right away. If it is not, if they're still a little hard and they don't want to peel well, I would actually put them in the microwave for a few seconds and let them try to soften up that way. But better to be, like if you weren't doing it today for this class and you had peaches that you wanted to use, but they weren't quite ready yet, put them in a brown bag, leave them on your kitchen table, not in direct sunlight, give them a few days to ripen some more. Blanching, I don't know what, adding water might change the content, the water content of it, and it might not separate. All right, I'm gonna try to hold this up a little bit. If you can see that I'm getting foam on there now, that means that I'm getting quite close to my full rolling boil. And then once it comes to a full rolling boil, even while I am stirring, which it is now, I need to set a timer for 1 minute. And you will boil it for 1 minute before you take it off of the heat. And you can tell that this stove is different than mine at home because I'm still bubbling everywhere, even in this good pot.
Right. Everybody's reducing heat is different on your stove. You have to learn your stove. So. And you also
And
noticed how Jennifer said a bigger pot is good, because if she was in a smaller pot, she would be getting burnt with little specks coming out right now.
And one trick that I learned when my other pot would do this all the time is I would hold the lid so that it would not be splashing on me and burning me. All right, there's my timer. It's been a minute, so I will turn off my timer. I will turn off my stove.
And there is a big difference between turning off an electric stove and turning off a gas stove.
I'm actually gonna take my jam off the stove and put it on some pot holders or a kitchen towel. And then this is where I'm gonna take the scum off. You don't want scum in your jars. So typically I'll have a Tupperware container of some sort and spoon it off with a clean spoon. So you're just kind of running the spoon along the top edge so that you're getting scum and not jam. If you're making this for yourself and you don't mind the look of the scum, it will be fine. Just some people don't like all that airiness in there. So it looks kind of like an orange smoothie. But then also usually I'll have a small jar like this on hand. This recipe says that I will need 6 half-pint jars for this recipe. It's always a little bit different depending on the peaches and how juicy they are and everything. So sometimes I get a whole half-pint jar more than it says I will. Sometimes it's just a little bit more, so I always have something. If it's enough to fill a little jar, then I'll put that in the water bath as well. Not of the scum, of course, but otherwise I'll just add that to the scum, whatever's left, and put that in the fridge and eat on that in the next few days. All right, so I got that out of there. So I need my funnel, and I need a ladle. And again, you want a plastic ladle. I have another kitchen towel so that I can set the hot jars on something that's not the counter, so that it's not ruining my countertop. In your kit, or if you have one from somewhere else, is our little jar picker-upper. So I'm going to bring my jars over so that it's easier. And I'm going to set my rack. Oops, that's a little more. a little different than my one at home. Okay, so you have to have a rack of some sort, no matter what kind of pot you're using. You need water all around it. These racks are nice. They hang on the top so that we can, you can put your jam in there and then let them all down together. My canner at home is an older canner, so the rack just sits down in the bottom. So I just add it as I go. All right, so to get my jar out of the hot water, I want to use this so I'm not burning my hands. I usually get them out 2 at a time. And then you're flipping it over and putting your funnel in. And then this is where we get to our headspace. So for jams and jellies, you need a 1/4 inch of headspace. That's what this other nice little handy dandy, covered it up with my towel. That's what this is for. So 1/4 inch, you don't need much headspace at all. And that's anything that is high acid like this. You want it filled almost to the top. A kind of a rule of thumb to go with it is you want it up to this, the rim, I guess that's a rim. So that way you can eyeball that a little bit easier. So I'm gonna fill these 2 up. And make sure that if you have some chunkiness in there and then a lot of juicier stuff, that you're getting some of each of those as you go, so that you're not just left with something really chunky at the end. Typically I take whatever I put my scum in, and that's what I put my funnel on, so that it's not getting the counter all sticky. And if I need just a little bit more in each of those, I can add just a little bit where I can see it better. And then you always need a wet rag to clean off the top. Because if there is anything on the top and you want to come down inside the rim just a little bit, to make sure that there's nothing there that will prevent your lid from sealing. Always use new lids, do not reuse them. Jars you can reuse until they crack. You always need a new lid because you want to make sure that it seals. The way that they are made nowadays, you do not need to heat them. In the past, you had to boil them for a while to loosen up the rubber so that they would work. That is not necessary anymore, but I always put it in my sterilized water just to make sure that they are nice and sterilized as well. So I'm setting that just on top, taking my ring band and putting that on there. And then typically I will have a pot holder to hold my jam. I'm going to move that jam out of the way so you can see a little better. Okay, so I'm going to hold my jam jar, and you're just tightening it, not tight, but you want to make sure that it's not loose, but not overly tight, because it needs to breathe a little bit to get the air out of it. So then I'm going to put that on my rack. And I will get out the next couple jars. If you're doing different sizes of jars, it's best to do them at a different time. Sometimes I will do a pint jar if I know somebody in the family has a big family, they want a lot. And I will set one of those in there as long as the water is still at least an inch over the top of that. But then I have to process everything longer to make sure that that pint jar is processing long enough. Because depending on the size of your jar, again, read the directions. It will tell you how long it needs to be processed in the water bath. I turn my water back up again. Once I take the top off, it doesn't stay as hot. So we don't want to be losing all of our heat in the process. I've known some people in the past who will set all these out and get everything in them before they put them all in there. It's better to keep them in the heat as much as possible. so that you're not cooling it down and then warming it back up again. All right, those are clean. Those in the water, so that's what this little handy dandy magnet is for. At home, I actually stole my husband's from his wood workshop because it's a much heavier duty magnet on a little handle. So he had to go buy a new one for himself. All right, so you set those on. Again, I'm gonna hold that with a pot holder so I don't burn myself. Snug but not tight. And make sure they're not tipping over, because that will make your jam not, the seal not set. That's on stay warm. I guess I should show using this. I'll do that on this next one here. This is one of those things that you want to do kind of as quickly as you can while still doing it in a safe manner. Again, so that it's not cooling off before it gets heated back up. Came down the side a little bit. I gotta make sure I clean that off good. One more on this one. All right, gotta put my glasses back on for this. So on our little wand, it will actually show, even my glasses, I have a hard time seeing because it's not like this. So it will show how much this is. So we've got a quarter and we've got a half up here, and then we've got an inch. Different things, like it said, depending on the acidity, need different amounts. So that would go on the edge. So that's where I want it to be. Not sure if you can see that. So, try to show you that one too. So I know that they're filled adequately, but you do want to make sure they are filled up that much, because you don't want extra air in there, because that's where your bacteria is going to grow. So don't try getting more jars out of it by having them less full. As you see, I'm shaking these off. I want to make sure I'm not adding more water to the jam. And the reason that pectin is different with lower sugar is that the sugar absorbs the water and then things can't grow. So if you're changing the amount of sugar, then you're going to have more water, and then you'll be more likely to have things in there growing that you don't want to. So that's why you always need to follow the recipe. So the low sugar pectin is going to be formulated so that it's going to absorb that water better.
Yep. And the sure gel, if you're wanting low sugar, then you can buy the sure gel. They're the pink packets. And then you can look at the pink packets and follow that recipe as well, for your low sugar ones, if that's what you're aiming for. But if you're going to have jam, you might as well have jam the good way. Everybody keeping up pretty good. I can see some people's cameras. I don't see everybody. Nobody's yelling at me or Jennifer to slow down. So I'm assuming everybody's staying on pace.
I'm learning a bunch, actually.
Good.
Not that one. That one's on floor. So also be trying to evenly space them around your canner as you're going. You don't want them touching each other, because you don't want them to jiggle against each other and break. Thank you. All right, I think you can kind of see that from there. If you have extras, there can go in the middle. And I will put this down into the water. All right, and then I need to make sure that my water is boiling before I start my processing time. We're gonna look back at the recipe. And it says, let's see. Bring water to a gentle boil, process jellies 5 minutes or process jams 10 minutes, adjusting processing time if necessary as directed in the altitude chart. We're not high enough altitude, we don't need to worry about that. So for this size jar, it is 10 minutes. If it was a pint-sized jar, it would be 15 minutes, which is does not say on here, but it will tell you that in the Ball Blue Book or probably in the UK publication as well. All right. So I see some nice bubbling around here. So I'm gonna put my lid on. I'm gonna turn it down just a little bit because with the lid on, it's gonna boil hotter and I don't want it coming out and over. And I will set my timer for 10 minutes. And then I will kind of pay attention to the sound as we go, just to make sure that it is still boiling. And I'll adjust my heat as needed. If it gets so that it's not boiling, just barely simmering, you'll need to get it back to a boil and start your 10 minutes over. It's not just adding on a few minutes. If you think it might have been off, you would actually start your 10 minutes again. Again, depends on the pot, depends on the stove, all that kind of stuff. So it takes a little bit of getting used to in your own kitchen with what you're doing. All right, so as you can see, I have just a little bit left in here. So I will use my scraper again. And of course, typically I taste test some to make sure it tastes good. But the rest of it will go into this jar that will then just go into the refrigerator to be used in the next little bit. And with this, doesn't matter how much scum is there, I scrape with as much as I can off of the side of the pan, just because I like my jam.
So while our pots are boiling and Jennifer's working on scraping that out, in your UK publication, Jams and Jellies start on page 131. And there has some like general information, and then there's several recipes that follow that. And some of the recipes include liquid pectin, some of them include powder pectin. So you have a few different ones that you can actually use. Also gives you the definitions of the differences between jams, jellies, butters, marmalades, conserves, and preserves. So I think that's kind of interesting because a lot of times I say, what's the difference between a jam and a marmalade or this and that? So it explains that all in that publication on page 131 as well. And why we're kind of waiting on. It's delicious. You already tasted it. Is there questions?
She said to, so I did.
There you go. That's fine. I'm sitting out here wanting to, I wanted to come eat a peach. Any questions as we're going? And Jennifer, can you hear or not hear in there? I can't.
Since this is boiling, I will come that way so I can hear questions. I'll be able to do it.
I tried to turn up your volume in there and I don't know. We'll check that. Is there any questions, anything you want to ask in regards to jams or jellies? So unmute yourself. Now's your time to ask questions you might have. fruits you might have tried that maybe haven't worked, fruits you're interested in trying, wanting to know if Jennifer has ever made it. Or I've done a lot of jellies and jams as well.
Is there a certain fruit or jam that you guys have tried that you didn't like as a jam or a jelly?
Personally, no, I like anything.
Okay.
My favorite is mulberry.
Oh, okay.
I'm not a whole huge fan of like the tomato jam.
Correct.
That,
Me
but
either.
that's me. But if it's fruit, yeah, but the tomato, and that's very popular, and a lot of people will do that.
Correct.
Sandy asked, could you have added some of the lemon peel to the mix?
Yes, you could, because like a marmalade would have that added. So I'm losing my voice. So that would be fine. I would kind of look at like an orange marmalade recipe just to see if they might tweak the amount of sugar to know if I needed to add a little bit more to counteract that acidity. But that would certainly work. One combination that I did one time, because we had an abundance of peaches and it just sounded good, is I made a peach rhubarb ginger with fresh ginger. And this was back before Rose at Fairy Rose Farm had ginger. But it was not a sweet jam, even though it had the full amount of sugar. It was more a savory jam, but it was delicious. Some people didn't like it because it wasn't sweet like they would want, but it would be really good with like on a biscuit with some stew or something like that. So feel free to play with different flavors and things like that. A lot of times you can find recipes that have 2 different types of fruit in it, or just kind of look at the recipe on the whatever recipe you're looking at. And as long as they're the same sweetness of fruit, I guess I would say, use half and half of one or the other or something like that. The times where you would need to watch it would be something like a rhubarb, because that's a vegetable officially, not a fruit. So you have to watch that a little bit more to make sure that you're still getting enough sugar in there so that it is just the right pH.
Other questions?
Did you say to check your pressure canner lid to just bring just the lid?
Just bring the lid with the dial gauge on top if you want it checked here at the extension office.
Well, mine is relatively new. Matter of fact, I don't even know if it's been used now to think about it. But does it need to be checked if it's newer?
Probably not, but you can always bring it in if you wish.
Okay, I just wasn't
The
sure.
reason why you bring your whole lid in, it's not that you could just bring the dial gauge in. It's checking that pressure, but then we
I
also
got you.
examine your lid and your seals and make sure
Yeah,
that they are okay as well.
I bought it to do tomatoes a couple of years ago, and my tomatoes didn't do very good, so I haven't used it yet. But I plan to this year.
There you go. Now, one thing I didn't talk about much was actually jellies. Typically, when I make a jelly, I juice my fruit first. Like our apples, we made apple cider, and I would make apple cider jelly. I have never had luck personally taking the fruit, putting it in water, boiling it down, letting it seep through the jelly jar, the cloth. To me, that's too long of a process. So I will puree my fruit, I will mash it, whatever, get jam out of, like my grapes, I would put through a processor so that I could get the juice from them. And it's also a little thicker, which I like. So jelly is really easy if you wanted to just buy grape juice in the store. Just make sure it's regular 100% grape juice and not some blend that doesn't have much fruit juice in it. And you could easily make jelly from that, apple juice, whatever. And that seems to work better. I also seem to cook my jelly too long, and then it's too hard to get out of the jar. So I don't do much with jelly, unfortunately. But I know other people have good luck with it. So
Yep.
Feel free to experiment.
And Sandy, as for your question, the yes, not really make an appointment, but you want to make sure that I might be in the office or Jennifer might be in the office so we can make sure we do it. Everybody, if we would happen to not be here, you could come in and the secretary might not know how to do it. So just making sure one of us are here, not necessarily an appointment to get your canner lid checked. And I would recommend if it's an older canner that you do have that. Now, remember, it has to be the dial gauge. We don't check the weighted gauges. So. Any other questions? Jennifer's gonna go back, see how our timer's going. We should be close to the 10 minutes and see what we do next.
All right. I still have 2 minutes left according to my timer. So, one thing to keep in mind when you take it out, again, you need like a cookie cooling rack that has sturdy feet, like nothing that's gonna fall under the pressure of the jam. Or just a kitchen towel to put the hot jars on. Again, you don't wanna put it on just a surface because taking something hot to something cold, your jars might burst, which you certainly don't want. So once this is ready to take out, I'm down to 50 seconds. Again, I will have my handy dandy jar lifter. And I typically leave my rack in there and just take each jar out separately. I don't try to bring the whole one up because that's really hot and I don't want to burn myself. So if you're used to doing it that way, that's fine. I would just rather not. And when you take them out, make sure you're keeping them flat. Do not be tipping them. The jar is hot enough that water is going to evaporate. You don't want to tip it because it will not be sealed as of yet. When you take it out there, it's going to be the suction of it cooling down that seals it. So you don't want to tip it or some of that jam might get under that seal and then it will be, it won't seal. So my timer just went off. That's my 10 minutes. Set that out of the way. And I will just come in here and I try to take out, if I remember where I started, the one I started that I put in first because it's been in there the longest. So I do let it drip just a minute, just because I don't want that water all over everything. Some jams taste good with some spices in them. Like if you were making a peach pie, you would put cinnamon and nutmeg in it. You could put a little bit of that in here and it would not change the pH of it. Blueberry recipes usually tell you to put nutmeg in it, just because it enhances the flavor. So feel free to put spices like that in it. You're not putting a whole lot in, so it's not going to change anything. All right, and I already heard one seal. So you want to be listening for those little suction pops as you go. Depending on the heat in your kitchen, sometimes it takes longer for that to happen. Sometimes it's a couple hours before it happens. Like when my kitchen was 100 some odd degrees, it would take longer for that to cool enough that that suction would happen. So just kind of be listening for that as I'm washing my dishes, whatever. I'll kind of just be paying attention. Oh, there's one pop, there's two pops. I know how many jars I had. Go from there. There goes a second one. So then when you look at it the next day and make sure they are all sealed. So they might take up to 24 hours. So if they are not all sealed after 24 hours, take that one that is not sealed and put it in your refrigerator to eat soon. Don't store it in a cool place with the rest of them. It is still good if you're eating it soon and it's in the refrigerator. Otherwise, if they are all sealed, then you can put it in a cool area. We have a basement, so that's where my jam goes. I have a cupboard for it so that it stays clean, but it's much cooler down there. You don't want them in direct sunlight because that's going to affect how they stay. So you also want to, once they're cooled and have sealed, you want to date them. Whether you make labels to give to family and friends, whether you just write on the jar lid, peach jam and the date, whatever your system is fine. Just make sure you have a date on there so you know when it was made and what it is. Last year, I was so busy with my orchard. There were so many abundant of fruit that I was making jams and making jams about every day after work. And my peaches, nectarines, and plums were already about the same time. And I had at least one batch, if not two, that I was like, I'll remember what those are. I didn't. So we have mystery jam at our house. I put a year on them and the month. Don't remember which day they were made, didn't know which fruit it was, but they still taste delicious. It's just like, here's your jam for Christmas. It's mystery jam. Tell me what it is. So as long as you got a date on there, nothing should stay for 40 years like in the past they had done. Seals are much better now. So on the box, it will tell you they're good up to 18 months. I will keep them longer than that if it's for myself. If I were selling it, I would not sell it at that point. But it's not gonna go bad in 5 years, but I certainly won't keep it for 10. So that's up to your discretion from there. Now, one thing to keep in mind is, say you have this jar of jam and next summer you eat it and then it's in, so you open it next summer and it's in your fridge and for some reason it starts to mold a little bit. At that point, it's probably because whatever was on the knife that you put in there to get your jam had breadcrumbs or something on it and you introduced mold. Jam is safe enough that at that point you can scrape the mold off and still eat the rest of the jam. If when you open the jar of jam there was mold on it, do not eat it. If it looks discolored, do not eat it. You can't always smell things when they're bad, but usually something will look off. I had a jar that appeared to be sealed, but when I went to open it, it didn't sound quite right. And the jam was a little syrupy. It was not set, whereas it had been set right after I had done it. So that one went in the garbage. It's kept the jar, of course, because you want to reuse your jars. They're getting harder and harder to find. But if it seems at all off, do not eat it. You don't want to take that chance. But if after you've opened it, it's been in your fridge for 2 weeks, you've been eating on it, a little bit of mold starts to grow, that you can scrape off and still eat the jam. So, any other questions out there?
Jennifer, I'm gonna have you come back out here.
I didn't hear it.
I'm gonna have Jennifer come back out here so we can answer questions in case you have any, because it's easier for her to hear out here.
Correct.
So all of ours have popped. Good, Denise. I've made a recipe. Sandy says removed. Heat and let it sit 5 minutes and then lift the lid out any differences. Now, if you follow the UK recipe and you follow the guidelines that's in that publication, it says they let it sit 5 minutes before you remove your jars. So that is common in a lot of recipes.
Correct.
Not going to make, if the recipe says that, do that. It's what UK also recommends in their publication. But as you can tell, the jar's sealed as Jennifer took it out. One thing I will say, and I think she said it even as you are taking those jars out, there's always water on the top and your instinct is to tip a little off. Don't, because that's what we think, because we see it. But if you notice, she put them over there, you don't want to, you want to kind of take it out, set it straight down.
Right.
Some other things that I think that you've seen when people like keep the jars close together because they're going to retain the heat and they're going to pop better. So you've seen people do that in the past. Don't do that. Leave spacing between them. Okay. So those are things that you might have seen and had seen other people do. It's hard to teach old dogs new tricks. And I come from a family of canned all my life and trying to teach my mom and dad new ways, the right ways is not always easy. So you might have saw lots of different ways and you're growing up. Just make sure, you're learning as you're going to, and you might have done because you can with your family.
Correct.
And don't do the thing that my great aunt always did, where she would make her, say, strawberry jam. She never water bathed it. She would put the jars upside down, the hot jam in the hot jar, put the jar upside down on the counter, and then the next day turn it right side up and it would typically seal. I would not trust that. You always want to be putting it in a water bath can or giving it that processing
Yeah.
time to make sure that things are being taken care of.
Just out of curiosity, though, I'm gonna try to gallery so I can see people's heads. I mean, I don't know how, I'm gonna age myself. How many people remember putting the paraffin wax on top of them when you were making jams or jellies?
Why not did that too?
Okay, we're just saying, that's
Yeah.
how I first started.
Sure.
So anyways,
We
Jen, you said-
can sausage that way. We would fry the sausage, put it in a jar, turn it upside down, and we ate it for years.
all right. So just because we did it in the past.
Probably
doesn't mean
kill
it
us
always
now,
was
yeah.
the Safest and things
Right.
change.
It'll probably kill us now, yeah.
Jen, you asked about, it's so sweet when you tasted a little bit of what you have. The low, if I'm remembering right, Shore Gel low sugar one just reduces the amount of sugar, changes the pectin in them.
Correct.
There are some recipes that say you can substitute certain things for them. So if you don't like those sugar substitutes, I would try the pink box of the Shore Gel
Right.
and see if you like that better.
Yes. Because then it just, sometimes you can choose, like if you buy the low sugar pectin that comes in a little, I call it a jar. It's plastic, and you can do like different amounts. It also has like different recipes that you can do. So you can do it like with half the amount of sugar, you can do it with a third of the amount of sugar, or you can do it with no sugar. So I've actually made some before with no sugar in them because my mom is diabetic. So like I've made grape jelly that is sugar-free. I'm just making sure I use that lower no sugar pectin. And then you're just eating the fruit. So it still tastes good. Just not, a lot of people like that sweet and that's why, but it's also setting differently, so.
Well, and these are the peach truck peaches, and I've had them now for, a few weeks, and they are so ripe and so sweet.
Right.
So maybe 2 weeks ago, it wouldn't have been so bad, but right now I feel like I'm eating,
Right.
frosting or something. It's so sweet.
Correct.
You just have to have the right pectin to use without adding the sugar.
Yep.
Okay, I'm
So,
gonna try that with some
Yep.
more of these.
Yep.
And one thing nice to do, like if this jam is too sweet for you to say you want to put it on toast, is use it for a recipe that calls for, like a lot of bar recipes, you use a jam of some sort. So use it for something like that where you need that sweetness anyway, as opposed to just putting it on your toast to eat for breakfast.
Yep. All right, I'm gonna hit stop recording. That doesn't mean you can still keep asking questions.